Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Sammy Roth.
And I'm Rosie Murphy, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
We are here talking about The New Man in Charge, the Season 6 epilogue.
Yeah, not actually an episode formally of the series, but as I understand it, a Season 6 DVD extra.
Yes, and Rosie, I know we normally start with hot takes, or we did back when we were making The Hatch, a podcast about Lost, but what I'm really excited about is this is your first time watching The New Man in Charge, right? You'd never seen it before.
That's right. I did not have the Season 6 DVDs.
So what did you think?
Yeah, I thought it was fun. It was just sort of a nice little coda. To me, it kind of felt designed to clear up what I think were thought of as common loose ends to the show. So, like, what was going on in Room 23? Obviously, the polar bears were in there. Walt, what happened to Walt?
The Hurley bird.
Yeah. So all that stuff that's like, personally, I don't know that those were questions I needed answers to, but I did think it was kind of a fun little coda.
I will take any additional Michael Emerson that I can
get.
Oh
my God, yes.
He is so good.
He's tremendous.
He makes me crack up with basically every line. When he's not making me go, aw, he's changed so much, he's making me crack up with every other line.
Yeah. So did you rewatch The New Man in Charge?
Oh, of course.
For this? What did you think initially, and what do you think about it now?
You know, in my mind, my hot take is that it's like, the easy version of the hot take is it's way better than I remembered. Like, in my mind, it was kind of a nothing burger.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they kind of did a thing to, like, appease people who, were annoyed that they didn't, like, explain the polar bears or what was going on in Room 23. I don't know. I actually liked it a lot more watching it again. Maybe I've matured since then, but I actually, I don't know. The Walt stuff I thought was really beautiful. I liked that there was finally, like, I don't know, there felt like there was pathos there to me.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like Walt, they were kind of in a bind with him because Malcolm David Kelly aged, and the timeline just didn't allow them to really conclude that story in a way that was meaningful.
Yeah.
So I liked that they were able to go back and finally give Walt some closure and some purpose. The idea that he would be able to use his special powers to help his dad move on from that sort of liminal space of being stuck, stuck on the island, unable to account for what he did and to move on. I thought that was really beautiful. I mean, the hairs on the back of my neck stand up when Ben says to him, "Because you're special, and I bet nobody's told you that in a very long time." Like, I thought that was beautiful.
Yeah, and indeed, the last people, I think that implies that the last people who said that to Walt would have been on the island.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Walt's been stuck.
Yeah.
Just like his dad.
Yeah.
I don't know. What did you think of that stuff?
I'm going to answer your question about Walt, but before we do that, I want to really quickly play a hot take from our listener, John, who I think discusses some of these little, what does it mean to answer these questions at this point questions.
Hi, Sammy and Rosie. This is John from Montreal. So my hot take is that while I think that the Ben turns off the lights at the Dharma supply station segment was pretty fun overall, like I really love how both it and the Hydra video dig into a bunch of different minor mysteries, from the palace to the Hurley bird to Room 23. One very small element bothered me, and it's specifically the line, "We deserve answers." For whatever reason, a lot of people who never finished the show, and honestly plenty who did, often point to the polar bears as an unsolved mystery, or at least a serious point of confusion. But it wasn't ever really an important mystery, and the answer was kind of simple and even a bit uninteresting. People brought these bears to the island. But why? Well, the Dharma Initiative, this group, was experimenting on them. But why? Well, polar bears are sensitive to something, the magic of electromagnetic displacement through space and time, etc., forever. Ultimately, the polar bear discourse is kind of a shorthand for the more general conversation about lost, unanswered questions, with some fans very angry at what they felt was a lack of answers, and the showrunners being pretty explicit about the fact that they weren't interested in addressing those concerns. They even had the mother character in Across the Sea say explicitly, "Every question I answer will simply lead to another question." So they're very directly addressing the audience through the show, which I also didn't love. So this is just one more iteration of that same discourse with the kind of whiny warehouse worker. Admittedly, in his case, it's understandable. He's been there 20 years. He doesn't know why he's doing this. But this worker demanding answers as a stand-in for annoyed fans. And while I get it, it's totally fair that I think the showrunners are doing this. It also feels a little bit petty and kind of too on the nose. It really took me out of the moment. But otherwise, loved it. Thanks. Love your show. Bye.
Yeah, I love this hot take from John. I think it is, obviously, we already said this, I sort of had a similar feeling about parts of The New Man in Charge that, like, oh, this is sort of like a coda that is designed to answer the like lingering questions in the fandom that, kind of like you, John, I didn't really feel like I needed answers to like what were the polar bears there for. I thought it was kind of, I didn't necessarily think it was overwrought, but I see where you're coming from.
It was extremely wrought.
It was heavily wrought. Yes.
You didn't laugh a little bit at the hybrid bird thing, that the bird was actually screaming hybrid, not Hurley? I thought that was funny.
I mean,
I'd forgotten about that. Actually.
Yes, I had totally forgotten about that. Honestly, and I had largely forgotten about Room 23. Like, it's been so long since we learned about these things.
Carl.
It's season 2, right? And season 4,
3,
I guess,
yeah.
when we're uncovering all these things about what life was like in the Dharma Initiative. And then, I felt like the show just kind of moved on and it wasn't that important. Like, I got the sense that Dharma was sort of a short-lived project on the island.
Those poor guys who are sending the pallet drops, like and they're so dedicated to it, like they don't know what the fucking island is, but they're like, oh my god, someone is depending on us somewhere. We have a launch window, yeah. And they're so sad when they find out, like, Dharma hasn't existed for
20 years, yeah.
It's like they just look devastated. Like, those poor, and the actors who were playing those guys,
the
they
actors
did a really
good job.
But to go back to John's point that this whole thing is kind of a stand-in for the writers kind of saying to the fans, like, really, you cared about this shit? Like, we're gonna kind of screw around with you for that. Like, yeah, those guys are a good stand-in for that. They look so sad, kind of sad, sappy. But I disagree with John a little bit, where it's like, I'm not actually mad at the writers for doing that. Like, if that was the point of that storyline, for the writers to be like, okay, like, really, you guys, like, you really needed an explanation for the polar bears. You really needed to know what the Hurley bird was. Like, I think that's hilarious that they made it for that reason. Like, I'm kind of applauding them a little bit, like, because I do think it was a little ridiculous. Like, this was not actually what Lost was about. And if this was the writer's way of saying, like, if you thought this was what Lost was about, like, you were missing the point. Like, I kind of think that's funny.
Yeah, no, that is funny when you frame it that way. And also the inclusion as a DVD extra, like, that's not something that's going to reach a wide audience,
well,
right?
As we know, you've never seen it.
No. And I was a Lost fan, but it's not like it's on streaming. It hasn't really come along with the show. It's something that was sort of created for this specific moment for people who were going to buy this DVD, which is a fan. And
right.
that seems to support that theory that it was made kind of to have a little inside conversation
yeah.
with the fandom.
I mean, some of this stuff is really inside. I mean, the Hurley bird for sure, but they pack a lot of stuff into the 12 minutes. Like one of my favorites was like the little subtle explanation for why Pierre Chang starts using aliases.
Yeah.
Like the whole, please don't leak my real name.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to start using aliases. Like totally forgot that one.
Yeah.
Like, oh my god. Okay, so that's where Marvin Candle and Mark Wickman and what was it, Edgar Halawax or something Halawax. That's where that comes from. Oh god, I wrote a few more of these down. I mean, the fish biscuits, of course.
Right.
Just like, give them the treats when they learn the tricks, and then they're going to be transported to the main island so that they can continue their training at the orchard. And the lamppost station in Los Angeles, like, that's where the orders are coming from. Oh, that's why the lamppost exists.
Right.
Like, they pack a lot in there.
Right, and this video is coming to you from the Hydra station, and, all these places that we've seen from a totally different perspective.
Right, and not to mention, like, the really in-depth explanation for, like, each aspect of the psychological torture of the others.
Yeah, they would so what they're saying is that they would kidnap the others.
Yes, in violation of the treaty.
Yes, and sort of chain them to a chair and subject them to these experiments. It's pretty fucked up, actually.
The
it's kind of disturbing.
Are evil.
Yeah.
It's like, and I know that not all of the others were actually like, indigenous to the island. Like a lot of, but they're talking about them as the native peoples of the island. Like, this is cruel on so many levels. Like, oh my god, these people are like coming to colonize the island and torture the native peoples and do experiments on them. Like, holy shit.
Right.
Like, Mark Candle or whatever you want to call him, Pierre Chang, is a bad dude.
No, it's deeply fucked up.
Yeah, so many levels. John, thank you for the hot take. Should we play Vicky's hot take too? We got a hot take.
Oh, sure. Vicky. Yeah, while we're here.
Yeah, Vicky, let's hear it.
Hi, Sammy and Rosie. This is Vicky from Reading in the United Kingdom. I've been absolutely loving your podcast for the past couple of years after rewatching Lost recently and absolutely adoring every single thing about it. Regarding the last man in charge, or the next man in charge maybe, I realized that I kind of think it's a little bit unnecessary. Like, Ben turning up into that warehouse, chatting to those guys that have been sending stuff through the Dharma Initiative, you know, the parcel drops for years and years. It doesn't really make any sense. And Hurley in the van when Ben goes to get Walt also doesn't make any sense, because I thought Hurley went off into the church with everybody else. But anyway, my hot take is really about how something else, more around, you know, at the end of season 6 when we were all watching it as episodes back in the day, and we all felt like that we wasted our entire life because the end of the season in season 6 was just so sort of uneventful. After rewatching it, you know, now we can watch every episode back to back, and we can watch 15 episodes in a day if we want. After rewatching it, I came to the conclusion that actually there was no other way to end it. Like, they ended up all in the church. It was the most magnificent ending. Everyone was together. I appreciate there was the whole Saeed thing that we weren't happy with, who he ended up with, and a few other bits and pieces. But at the end, you know, I just loved it. I've absolutely adored rewatching it with you both. I really appreciate everything that you've brought back to us, and just listening to everything through both of your perspectives has just been so magnificent. And I've got my 18-year-old daughter into it as well, and she's completely obsessed.
Vicky, thank you very much for the hot take. Very glad to hear that the finale is more meaningful and positive for you now than it was at the time. I think that's true for a lot of people. I
think so too. I mean, we definitely heard that from a number of listeners when we were talking about this last year, and I think I felt similarly.
Yeah, I don't know. I think in terms of Hurley going off into the church, I mean, that was after they were all dead, right? Mm-hmm. And this is while Hurley is still alive. So I think that's the sort of explanation for that. Did you feel like this was unnecessary? Because I'm not sure I would feel that way. Because like I said, to me, the Walt stuff was very meaningful, even if the rest of it was kind of an in-joke.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I do think it was unnecessary. Can the show stand without it? Of course. It did for the vast majority of fans. So in that sense, it's unnecessary. I'm glad I've seen it. But yeah, I don't think it's essential to one's understanding of the broader lessons of the show and things like that.
But Walt!
I know. I am happy that we got to circle back to Walt. Because that to me, of the sort of quote-unquote unsolved mysteries that we were talking about, that to me is the one that I think I would have liked the answer to most. As we said, I didn't care about, I don't care about the polar bears. I don't really care about the Hurley bird. But Walt, I mean, kind of vanished, right? He went back to normal life, such as it is, and was put in the position of having had this wild, unexplainable experience, and then it just has to go back to the real world.
Right.
I do want to know what that does to a person and what he was able to make out of that. And the answer they give us is actually quite sad, right? He ends up in a mental hospital. He ends up in care. That was in. Right. It gave me the same feeling. I mean, and this is partly because they said it in the same hospital that Hurley was in, but it gave me this sense of, there's sort of unfinished business here, right? And everyone who interacts with the island needs to sort of close that circle, and Walt still needs to close that circle, and Hurley and Ben recognize that. And it is fun to see Hurley and Ben doing their buddy cop thing. Yeah, I remember watching the finale and thinking I loved the idea of Hurley and Ben as the number one and number two, but you still kind of wonder can Hurley really grow into this role? Can Ben really learn to be the number two and give up the power-hungry madman side of himself? Because that's who he's been for so long. Yeah. But then you kind of see them both, that is one thing one of my favorite things about the new man in charge. You see them both so clearly thriving in those roles. Hurley has this kind of mystique about him and this just deep sense of self and confidence, and Ben just seems so happy. Yeah, I agree. Hurley specifically, so much of Hurley's dialogue throughout the show, he's using a lot of ums and a lot of likes and just doesn't seem always terribly sure of what he's saying, or he's kind of second guessing himself just in the way he speaks. And he doesn't do that at all.
Oh, you're so right.
He only has like one or two lines, right? But he's speaking clearly, completely, no hesitation. He just kind of has this serene, confident facial expression. Like it really did give me the sense that he's grown into a sort of confidence, which is cool. As a Hurley stan, it's great to see.
And it's cool to see him kind of rescuing Walt from the same place where he was stuck for so long.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad that they both got the care that they needed there. Obviously, I'm not saying you necessarily need to be rescued from a mental health institute, but to see him kind of be able to take Walt from that place where clearly neither of them wanted to be for too much longer, it's really beautiful.
Yeah.
Man, I like it a lot, I have to say. I found myself enjoying it a lot more than I thought I would.
Yeah, I am glad that I've seen it. Will I watch it again? I don't know.
I mean, it's not on Netflix.
No.
Lost is now on Netflix again, you know.
Oh,
As
nice.
of like last week or something, just very recently, it's now the Lost. Shout out to @the Lost fans on Twitter who always I love them. They always are like retweeting our tweets when we're sharing the Hatch on go at the Hatch podcast on Twitter for those of us who don't yet follow us. Not that there's much more to follow because this is just about it probably, but they've been sharing everyone's reactions to Lost now being on Netflix, and it's very exciting. Lots of new Lost fans coming in.
Good.
Yeah. So it seems. One other line that made me crack up, just going back to just Michael Emerson being such a great comedic actor, is when he asks the guys in the pallet drop, "You guys have a DVD player?" Like maybe that's just the passage of time, but it's like now we can all imagine saying that's like, does anyone have a DVD player? And when he's going through the booklet of the Pierre Chang DVDs, like, oh my God, there are so many of them. It's like, how many more of these things did they make?
Well, remember, he says, "I'm sorry for the poor quality. We converted this from a Betamax." And remember the episode where they discover the tapes for the first time?
Oh, yeah.
Remember how many tapes were in there?
I'd forgotten that.
Like, presumably it's all of those, and they've been digitized, right?
Right.
Somehow they made it off the island, and we're...
I mean, we've got to upgrade those for the digital era now.
Those need to be on YouTube.
I mean, those need to be in the cloud.
Actually, I don't think they do, because, as discussed, the Dharma Initiative was doing some deeply unethical science.
No, we need them for the records. We need to document that for history.
Oh, jeez.
The mortal arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards the Dharma Initiative being digitized in the cloud.
Oh, God, I hope not. Well, I'm so glad I got to watch The New Man in Charge. Thank you for insisting that we do this.
Oh, I think that it was a priority for both of us, right? It just, life takes time.
You know, we got there in the end. We did. And I'm glad we briefly... I know they don't go back to the island in the episode. I guess it's implied that they do. I mean, afterward.
The island is home for all of us.
Right. Indeed.
But now it is time, as Christian Shepherd says, to move on.
Yes, it is. But this has been a pleasure, as always. We hope that you are all well, wherever you are.
And we hope that you continue to tell your friends about The Hatch as they go back to Lost and watch it for the first time, and as they rewatch the show and look for podcasts about it. The Hatch lives on Apple Podcasts and on all of the other apps. We'll still be there in your podcast feeds, even if we are not recording new episodes.
We remain on Twitter @The Hatch Podcast. You can find us at facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast.
I will continue to check those accounts from time to time, so feel free to send us messages and I'll do my best to reply to them. Thank you so much for being with us on this journey and for returning to the island with us one last time.
Namaste.